Assumption number 2, peaceful social being is preferable to isolation and to war. In consequence, it justly and rightly demands some sacrifice of individual impulse and idiosyncrasy. Okay, so you want to live alone in the bush? You're going to starve to death and be eaten by black flies. It's not a good solution. Okay, so you have to cooperate with other people, and that means you can't get to be your whimsical self 100% of the time. It means that most of you has to be sacrificed so that you can be approximately like everyone else. Now that's a real sacrifice, right? It's a sacrifice of it might even be a sacrifice of some of the unique qualities that everyone needs from you. Socialization costs, but the advantage of it is, well, we get to exist. Look, we can all sit together in this hall and no one has their hands around each other's throats, and we're talking about serious things. Okay, man, that's worth something. And what it's worth in part is you don't get to be whatever spectacularly colored creature you want to be all the time. You have to do what you can to be normal and predictable. And it's not like normal and predictable is the highest virtue, because it's not. And being more than normal and being unique and creative and contributing in that way is extraordinarily important. But the fundamental point is that social being requires the sacrifice of a certain amount of individual idiosyncrasy. And that's a fundamentally conservative claim. It's like you should do what everyone else does unless you have a really good reason to vary. It's a good rule. It's like you do what people have done throughout time. You grow up, you find a partner, you establish a stable relationship, you get a job, you make yourself useful, you have some children, you do something productive and interesting with your spare time, and you try to act like a respectable human being. That's what you do. That's a conservative ethos. And if you have something spectacular about you that needs to be revealed to the world, then break some rules, man. Go right ahead. I'm dead serious about that. But most of the time you don't. And even if you happen to be a special person, and you might be, 90% of you still isn't special. So most of the time you're still going to be following the rules. And the rules aren't there to oppress. They're there to keep us away from each other's throats. Because human beings are very warlike, and we're very competitive, and we're very aggressive. And if we are fortunate enough to have woven together a social fabric that basically renders us peaceful and cooperative, we should try disrupting that at our great peril. Because the general rule for human existence throughout the centuries has been turmoil and war. And we don't have that here. And so thank God for that. And it's worth a bit of a sacrifice.
Someone else's rights are my responsibility and vice versa. That almost defines the relationship between rights between people. And liberty is not the allowance to engage in every short-term hedonistic whim impulse. That's chaos, that's not liberty. Liberty is more like what occurs when you have skillful players who are all playing the same game. And game is a good model, right? Because the people who are playing a game, well, they want to play the game. So you're in a free association if you're playing a game. If you're compelled to play, it's not a game. So you have to do it freely. You have to do it voluntarily. You have to abide by a set of governing principles that lay out the domain for peaceful cooperation and competition within the game. Imagine a game of opposing teams, let's say. And so the rules underneath are the preconditions for the freedom of the game. And so liberty, if liberty is the playing of a game, which I think is an optimized description of liberty, then it has to take place within a set of agreed upon rules that set the playing field for the game. And there aren't an unlimited number of playable games. We know this not least because of attempts to produce multiplayer worlds online. Some multiplayer worlds degenerate into chaos and catastrophe because they turn out not to be iterable playable games. And so the universe of playable games is actually structured in some way that we don't fully explicitly understand, but it does abide by certain principles. Like, well, for it to be a game, it has to be a game played by people who are voluntarily associating. And then there has to be a minimum number of principles that everyone understands. And there has to be some structure of hierarchical punishment and threat and reward. And you have to be a good loser, and you have to be a good winner, and you have to want to play the game again. And you have to facilitate the development of your teammates, all of that. And so liberty has to be construed not so much as the absence of super ego-like rules that are doing nothing but imposing upon your hedonic, narcissistic, biological whims, as more like the integral balancing of all your motivations and emotions within an iterable structure. That's liberty. It's like a game. When God tells Moses to tell the Pharaoh to let the people go, that is not what he says. He does not say, tell Pharaoh to let my people go. He tells Pharaoh, let my people go so they may serve me in the wilderness. And that's repeated 10 times, which means that God means it, by the way, because that's why he says it 10 times. And it means something like, when you move from freedom and you move into chaos, all you've done is move from tyranny into the desert. And the desert's no better than the tyranny. That's why the Israelites get all fractious in the desert. That's why they wander around blindly for 40 years. It's like out of the tyranny where everything was ordered into the desert where nothing is ordered. It's like that's not an improvement. And whatever the promised land is, it's not the mere domain of narcissistic 2-year-old impulsive whims and freedoms. In that sense, I can do anything. It's like, well, no, you can't. No, you can't. And you don't even want to.
Let's say you're miserable and unhappy. Okay, here's a cure. Find what's valuable and let it go. So we could say, well, maybe it's a relationship that you have. Maybe it's a relationship with your parents, right? And the relationship is pathological, but you're locked into it. You value it. And no wonder, because it's a relationship with your parents. And you're suffering terribly because of it. Well, what do? Maybe you let it go. It's a sacrifice. And the idea is that, well, that'll clear the future for you. Well, very frequently when people are suffering terribly, not always, because sometimes you just suffer stupidly, blindly, and without recourse. You get cancer and then you die. So we have no idea how to deal with that. But sometimes the reason that you're suffering is because you just won't let go of the thing that's biting you. And you think, well, I can't let go of, and I've had clients like this. I can't stop communicating with my mother, who phones me 3 times a day, every day of my life, and never says anything that isn't unbelievably critical and demeaning. I can't let that go. It's like, well, that's not such a good idea. The funny thing too, often when people let something like that go, it goes away, sorts itself out, and then comes back. So they don't even end up losing it. But unless they're willing to let it go, to sacrifice it, they make no headway whatsoever. And so one of the rules is, if people are impeding your development, you sacrifice your relationship with them, right? It's a very, very rough rule.